Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be looking at the Viltrox 23 and 33 1.4 lenses from a videographer's standpoint and asking the question, are these the perfect video lenses for Fuji? In that quick montage, I was using both of these lenses. The first half was filmed with the 23-1.4, the second with the 33 1.4. And I was using the X-T4 handheld. And all of that with the effort to try to confirm what I already suspected from my photographer's reviews of these lenses, and that is that these lenses might just work great for videographers as well, for lots of reasons. But before I get into those reasons, I do want to let you know that I will be giving these lenses away. Viltrox was kind enough to send them out for review. I will not be holding on to them. I'll be giving them to you guys. So stay tuned for a future video where I'll announce how you can enter to win those. The only reason I'm still hanging on is because I still need to do my final review of the 33-1.4 now that they've got an updated firmware, and my photographer's review of the 23-1.4. So still lots to do, but I look forward to giving them to two of you lucky people in the near future. So like I said, guys, these lenses do offer a great value to photographers and videographers starting out on the Fuji platform. But let's rip the band-aid off first and start with the bad, because for some, these things I'm going to bring up first might be deal breakers, and it's always better to get rid of the bad news first before we dive into the good news. And the first piece of bad news that I have for you is that yes, these do have clickless apertures, which I know a lot of you videographers like for adjusting exposure smoothly, but having a clickless aperture with these lenses gets you nothing with the integration, because they still have to communicate with the Fuji device, and Fuji does not do smooth or stepless aperture adjustments, which has kind of been their bane for a lot of video shooters who deal with that. So in fact, in some ways it's actually worse than you would get with a 23mm 1.4 or the 35 1.4. Yeah, that's just because it's not the same as if you had a manual aperture lens where it's all mechanical, it's all happening inside of here. It has to communicate to the camera and then back to the lens again to adjust the aperture. The reason why is because you can adjust the aperture from the camera. So Viltrox has to get the aperture adjustment from the camera, not from the aperture ring. So that's why it would be really cool if there was a way to switch that off and override the aperture. And you should still get your focusing from the camera, but the aperture from mechanically, but that's not possible. So bad news for those who are excited about the clickless aperture. And so really, it's just the clickless aperture is a bummer for videographers and photographers. Nobody is happy with these clickless apertures. The next piece of bad news isn't quite as bad because it's a status quo. It's the focusing, the smoothness of the autofocus. Now, a lot of videographers don't rely on autofocus as well. You shouldn't with larger glass lenses like these, where on Fuji at least, you get a sort of hesitant focus, right? The focus is a little bit hesitant. It doesn't move smoothly. This is especially noticeable with these larger larger primes. The 23mm 1.4, the 35 1.4 is notorious. 16mm 1.4, the focus is just not smooth, and I'm seeing that with the Viltrox as well. If you need smooth autofocus, there's no comparison to the F2s. But these have their own issues, which we'll come back to. So yeah, that's the bad news. Let's get to some good news, because I know a lot of you were hoping these might work for you, and they still might. Again, especially if you don't go in and out of bright light a lot and you don't need a smooth aperture adjustment, and if you don't rely on autofocus, well, these might just be perfect. So let's talk about why they could be perfect. And the first reason is because of price. If you're comparing price of, let's say, the 23-1.4 and of the Fuji to the Viltrox, this is about half, and that's consistent with the 33 versus the 35 1.4 as well. So if you need faster glass, these are obviously going to save your wallet quite a bit. And if all things were equal between these two lenses, then that's a huge advantage. And the good news is that there are some actual advantages, not just is image quality on par, but image quality is about on par. Now, it's not perfect. With the 23-1.4, you do handle the chromatic aberration a little bit better than you do with the 23-1.4 Viltrox. Again, I would say the same thing probably applies. That was the 35, but you get my point. The same thing applies. The equivalence with Fuji, you're going to get a lot more control over the chromatic aberration, and that's because of the better coating that Fuji has. They coat their lenses to control that. There's also, I don't know if it's still happening on the video end, but there are some corrections happening in the software on Fuji's device that is not going to happen here. Whether good or bad, you don't get any control over, or as much control out of the chromatic aberration. That just means you'll have a little bit of a green hint or purplish hue, depending on how your subject is and the background relative to your subject or foreground. But to me, it's not bad. It's completely livable, and I really feel like the image quality is on par with just about any other optics brand otherwise, at least with these copies. Now, the other thing you do have to watch with third-party up-and-comer Chinese manufacturers is that sometimes their tolerances are not as tight, so you'll get variance, and you just got to make sure you get a good copy. But we do know they have a potential to have good image quality from what I've seen in other reviewers, and definitely from these copies. The next thing I like about them is that they share the same filter thread size. I really like that because I can swap ND filters if I'm using them as a pair, and that makes things more affordable. I can share ND polarizers, and I like that too because I can use these Freewells. I really love these Freewell filters. They're magnetic. They've got the little magnetic rings that attach to the end, which make it really smooth to pull them off and put them back on. Yeah, and that also helps from a hybrid shooter's perspective. From a photographer's perspective, I can take that ND off if I'm shooting stills and then back on for video. So it's a beautiful thing, and I like that they share that size. Next is sound quality, and I want to just share with you a comparison because this is where I feel like there's actually a strong advantage from Viltrox over the Fuji equivalents. So let's look at things again on the X-T4 with a 33. Oh, let's get the 23, sorry. All right, 23-1.4 Viltrox. I'll hold it close to my mic and do some continuous autofocus. It's very quiet. It's probably comparable to the F2s, but we'll test that in a second. But just as a contrast, here's the 23mm 1.4 from Fuji. So quite a bit quieter, and it's probably comparable to, like I said, if we compare that to the 35 F2 of Fuji, which these ones are known for how quiet they are, but it's not hard to be quiet when you're moving such a small amount of glass. So that's near silent. So let's compare that 35 F2 to the 33 1.4 Viltrox lens. I can't tell a difference from here, but maybe on the mic we'll be able to tell. But that's a strong advantage for those who have miking happening near the camera, which I do and many other content creators do. For a lot of professional videographers, you're not going to do that, right? You'll have your miking will happen elsewhere. But for a lot of us run and gun types, the shotgun mic will be mounted to the device. A lot of those primes that Fuji has, they don't have a big priority on quiet focus, and they're just so loud. So I did say that the f2 versions of the Fuji lenses are near silent, but they come at disadvantages in other ways that are not pleasant for videographers. And props to Crispy B, who told me about this in the comments. This is my next reason why the Viltrox lenses might be preferable, and that is that the f2 versions of Fuji lenses especially, but I've heard that also applies to the 1.4 versions, Fuji does some vignette correction that becomes apparent during video capture when transitioning from dark spaces to bright spaces. With third-party Viltrox lenses, you won't see that since Fuji doesn't try to add any in-camera corrections to third-party lenses, obviously. And relating to that is the next reason. Unlike Fuji's photographic-centric lenses, these two lenses they don't demonstrate any focus breathing. Which is not the case with the 35 especially. Both 35 lenses from Fuji have horrible focus breathing. The 23 is not so much, so it's mostly going to happen with the 35. So this is the biggest advantage here was with the 33-1.4, where you don't get any, and that's actually a pretty strong advantage for filmmaking. If you want a 50mm equivalent, that makes this a very strong contender. But it is great also that the 23-1.4 demonstrates very little focus breathing as well. But those are some reasons why these might work great as video lenses. They may not be the reasons you were expecting, as in the case of the clickless aperture. But as far as value and as far as other functionality and features, they're gonna work great. And I would not hesitate if I was a newer videographer on a budget, just getting into Fuji. These could be great options for you. But that's all I've got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to stay subscribed so you can find out when I give these away, like I said. And until then, remember to do some good with your video content, and we'll talk to you again real soon.